Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It looks like we got 3 more minutes, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put it out there. Be happy to help. I usually say that a whole bunch during like the first couple weeks. I stopped saying it, but it's always a standing assumption.
Why did you make pie charts?
No, no pie charts. I don't think I'm going to require anyone to construct any graphs in this class. It's going to be more about reading the graphs that you see. And to be honest, I won't really be producing too many pie charts. It's going to be more bar chart and a histogram are going to be our main ones we're looking at. I accidentally started the recording another 5 minutes early. So if you come back to these videos, you might have to skip a little bit ahead. I'm just going to be staring at the camera.
So you opt to opt out, you have to go to my ISU.
Taking notes on this as well. No one has informed me on this.
I only know because they had me do it. I gotta remember one. You can go to I think you posted it. I just wanna make sure I'm opted in.
You are by
If you're-
default. Yeah,
Everybody's automatically opted in. So.
that has its own set of ethics, but yeah.
Yep.
So this being a 4 credit class, it seems like the best bet is to opt out to save some money on that.
But you can't opt out for just one class.
Oh, so it's like a whole math problem at that point. Geez.
Either you pay for all of it or you just pay for your books, but sometimes the books cost more, so.
Very case by case then. Well, looks like we can get started, folks. Welcome back, everyone. For the announcements, I don't have anything too major, but you're going to notice some small changes on the Moodle website as we get moving throughout the course. For example, once I believe we're definitely finishing a chapter or section on a given day, I post the due date. So that's when the due date becomes official. It's also duplicated onto the MyStatLab. And so those dates stop moving once you see it posted here. But if for some reason I was just wrong and we need an extra day on chapter 1, we'll take it and I'll just revise that due date, pushing it so that there's always a 1 week turnaround after a section's completed. Other thing to bring up is there's a question last class. I'm sorry, I forgot who asked it. But the cost I heard from another instructor for my stat lab access is $99 if you opted out of the ISU book bundle. So this is really very complicated. Everyone got opted into the ISU book bundle. And so now there's like a calculation you have to do to decide, are you going to save money if you opt out? I've heard from students you have to opt out for every class if you're opting out, not just one class. So it's a very case by case basis on what the best value is for everyone. That is really weird, by the way. Any questions or additional comments about that folks would like to put in?
Did he mention at all where you can pay for that if you did opt out?
I believe what's going to happen, and this is still on, I believe, or let me start over. It looks like,
What happened with me
yeah,
is, when I applied for my financial aid, they opted me in. I opted out after financial aid already paid for everything. Financial aid sent me my money, and then I got it after. So did you pay for? So it paid for the book bundle, and then I opted out, it gave me my money back for the book bundle. But for the Pearson, did you pay for that $99 yet? Not yet. Okay.
so what I've heard on that is in the Pearson right here, whether you've opted in or out, it's treating you like you opted in. And supposedly after 2 weeks of the semester starting, that would be September 2nd. Another instructor, Pageant Jones, she has good information, so it's September 6th potentially. But one of these dates after 2 weeks passes, that's the 2 weeks of complimentary access. And if you opted out, it's at that point the system will ask for a payment. So that's what I've heard so far. It sounds like they haven't found a way to track down if you opted in or not. That's what it sounds like to my ears. So everybody gets inside this by registering. And even if you've opted out, it just gives you access without asking for payment. So that's very odd and some figuring out for them to do. Yeah. So keep in mind, if you did opt out, there could be a cost that suddenly pops up when you go into that system. Other questions or comments about that? That would be nice. So you wouldn't have to worry about in a couple of weeks, I might have a huge chunk of cash I have to pay to something. So that is another huge thing that's awful. If I was a student in this class and I opted out and I'm working in there for 2 weeks and there's no indication that I'm on some free trial, I wouldn't expect $100 payment to come up. So that's really awful. I have to apologize for that. It's really poorly set up. Something to be aware of, and I'll be sure to complain to the department chair, Patrick Ralt, about the student experience. It's pretty terrible for this. I'm not too sure what he can do, but Patrick Ralt is up there at ISU. He can yell at the uppers and the administration for our end. Well, other questions at the moment, folks? Okay, well, with our goal today, we want to complete chapter 1. And I felt like, again, we don't want to go too far today. There is a lot of weird stuff we're trying to figure out all at once, like we've been mentioning about the book bundle. So there is no new quiz right here. And I felt like after we complete this right here, I want to go back up into this and demonstrate one of the problems in the homework set. Some of these problems are pretty challenging, so we'll go through one as a class, just kind of a group experience, and see if we can nail the last problem in that homework set. It's longer than I expected. So when I'm assigning problems, I didn't realize that if you answer a question, there could be a whole lot of other parts that pop up. So I'm going to try to control the length of these homework sets, and we'll do the last one as a class to try to help out, so it's not so much of a bear if you've taken a look at that one already. So that's where we are so far. Let's finish off this chapter right here, and then we'll take a look at just more practice in my stat lab. Any questions first before we jump in? Okay, so we left off right on before example 4, before reading the definitions. But let's first turn to, let's see here, what we did in example 3, since this leads into the very next example. So here, we were just looking at description of data. There's 53 lakes, so we call that the sample, or the who of the study is of the 53 lakes. We're interested in all lakes in Florida. And so in this particular problem, we were just concerned about what are the variables at all in this situation. We mentioned these are the variables going across here where we're making measurements on the individuals, the who of the study. But watch out for things like lake name. This was the one that was not a true variable. That was just one way to tell apart the actual lakes in the study. So with that in mind, we're hinting at there's more going on in chapter 1. The variables are not really the same. Some of them are numeric, some of them are just descriptions like over here. And so that leads into the two classifications of variables. Variables will either be considered categorical. You might have heard that as qualitative, and that's completely synonymous in this class. I'm going to try to always say categorical since that's as our book does. Variables could also be quantitative. You may say numeric, and that's another synonym. But telling between the two, sometimes it can be a little bit subtle. For example, if you're thinking about zip codes like 83405, something like that, well, it is a number, but that's not numeric data whatsoever. Zip codes are just a way to categorize people geographically, for example. Another one, well, that's this example here. So variables like zip codes, they're purely categorical. Anyone see what another variable could be that's nothing but categorical? Phone numbers, absolutely. Phone numbers are just a way to say, contact this person by this number here. And why is a phone number categorical? Well, think if you have a bunch of phone numbers, well, it's numeric, right? You could take the average of those phone numbers. What would the average of a set of phone numbers even mean, though? It's just nonsense information, right? So if taking an average has no apparent meaning, then it's probably not numeric at all. Similarly, there's no purpose of taking the average of a whole set of zip codes. And maybe for another one, let's say here first, another example is phone numbers. Any volunteers for maybe a third example? Absolutely. So social security numbers. And lots of things like that. Maybe, for example, blood types and so on, eye color, gender, all sorts of things could all be considered categorical data. Let's just say, sorry, say again? It kind of depends, yeah. So if we're, say, have a whole set of data and let's say it's a whole bunch of individuals and we're categorizing people by maybe, let's see here. Seems like kind of a stretch now that I think of it, because now if we're thinking in terms of, say, over here, yes, that would make it categorical in that case. Yeah, if we're looking at how many people have that same name in a particular year, now we're categorizing, say, all the Marys, all the Josephs, and so on. Now you make categorical data. But if we're going to one, kind of like this, one lake gets one particular name, that's when it becomes more of an identifier in spirit. So that's about what categorical data would look like. Let's just say, etc., since there's loads and loads of examples. For example, your level here at ISU, freshman, sophomore, junior, master's student, and so on. Those are all categorical data. Your program, your college, all of that is considered categorical information. And it's definitely useful, but with all this categorical information, you never calculate, say, an average for those. They would just never make sense. What makes sense to calculate an average of? Things like, say, quantitative variables. You could ask for the average height of everyone in class today. You'd have to make a measurement and calculate it, but that would make sense. So for my quick example here, variables such as the ages of individuals in a sample are numeric, since you can now talk about the average age, and it has a sensible understanding. Well, any volunteers for a couple more quantitative variables? Kind of depends on our population, right? Let's say our population is all ISU students. Let's put down a population for that. Then let me get a little bit of space here to think that through. Let's see if I can push that down. Oh, not quite. One more try. Well, we'll just put that down and I'll rewrite it. Sometimes moving one thing or another kind of breaks the digital ink. So let's say the population is all ISU students once I get that put in. If that's the population and we're measuring variables, what would you figure is a good quantitative variable in that setting? I'll go first. How about let's say, number of credits completed. Certainly, if you're interested in the population, all ISU students, that would be a very interesting piece of data to have. And certainly, if you're part of the higher level administration of ISU, you already have access to that kind of information. But that would be considered definitely quantitative data. Anyone have another one to throw in there? GPA would be a great one. Let's say GPA, and there's probably tons and tons of other examples. Anyone have one they want to add in before we go to the next example? I would say if you were maybe an administrator at ISU, someone who has lots of control policy and way things work at ISU, maybe another quantitative variable of interest would be number of miles to commute to class. Then you could calculate the average miles for all ISU students, or maybe subsets, say people who are ISU students at Idaho Falls campus or exclusively the Pocatello campus. And that's pretty meaningful data, because if you get a handle on what that information looks like, you can start designing the campus in a way that's friendly for a campus where a lot of students commute, or maybe somewhere in the middle. But you do want to get a handle on what that data even looks like first before you make decisions.
Number of classes per semester for each student.
I think that'd be a great one, absolutely. They'd be very, very interested in that, since that's what ISU is all about, offering classes. And if that number on average goes down, maybe something is going wrong. Maybe the book bundle is causing a problem, for example, and that's something that they need to correct. So let's say number of classes enrolled in. I'll just say enrolled. So those are two different kinds of variables. And again, sometimes categorical variables are really easy to spot. If we scroll up for a moment, here we consider that categorical because all we're doing is looking at every single lake, determining the age of the data that they have on it, and just classifying it as being year-old data or recent data. That already makes that a categorical variable in its own right. But it looks like everything else here would be quantitative, because you could talk about the average pH of all 53 lakes that was in the sample, and so on for other values right in here.
So yesterday we did an example where there was a male and female,
Mhm.
and I couldn't remember if we did that as categorical or quantitative. And then yesterday there was a sample or a problem in the homework that was categorical, and it confused me.
Gotcha.
For like, how often would like male or female be categorical versus quantitative?
I would say it's always categorical.
Always?
Yeah, and then one thing that's kind of crazy about that is, let's hold that thought for 1 minute. I think I have a pretty good example of when that comes up. Let me go to, I didn't have it with me today, but I have all these crazy Moodle websites. Let's go to this one. I think it's going to be right here. And I have a crazy study on this one that goes, let's see, there it is. This study is about the forced expiratory volume, called the FEV. If you've ever had pneumonia, you've probably done a test like this in the ER room. What it does is it indicates how strong your lungs are by you take a full inspiration of air, and then you forcibly blow into a device, and they measure the first corresponding volume of air that can be forcibly blown through a device in the first second after taking a full inspiration, full set of air in your lungs. That's probably not the best way to say that. Anyone use a device like this before? You probably could explain it better than I did. Essentially, you just take a full breath of air, blow into a device, and they see how much air you moved in that 1 second. So,
Makes you cough like that.
oh, does it? Yeah. Really good measure of just how well your lungs are working. And of course, that's important for survival. So we're interested in that information. But here's a really interesting set of data. It says the FEV data file contains values of a large sample of children, along with some descriptions of each of the individual. here's a portion of that data set. First column is age, so that would be quantitative. This would be quantitative as well for FEV, same for height. And this one on sex, it's tempting to say quantitative, but even as zeros and ones, it's still considered categorical. So why would they have done that? The only reason for zeros and ones is that in some computer programs, it's just easier to put in numbers rather than letters or words. And so they get coded up in this kind of way. Likewise over here, when it says smoke zero, this is also categorical. Zero denotes the child did not smoke. One denotes the child was smoking, which probably means they're in an environment with secondhand smoke, not necessarily that they're buying packs of cigarettes. But that's one thing that's really weird. Just because you see numbers doesn't necessarily tell us a determination. It has to do all about with what they're doing with the data. If the zeros or ones are just being assigned to people based on sex, based on whether they smoked or not, it's got to be categorical in that case. But does that help with that question there?
So they could be all yes or no's are always categorical.
Sorry, say, yeah, yeses or no's, absolutely, yes.
They can't be like,
It's more about there's no real unit there. There's no unit whatsoever on the zeros or ones. Here, there is a unit. I believe this is a 9-year-old. That's got to be inches or centimeters, probably inches, right? We'll think about the unit on that one. This one has a unit. It's in liters and so on. And so that's one big giveaway. If you've got an honest unit that goes along with your number, it has got to be quantitative. But if you can't even figure what the unit would be, zero what? Makes no sense. Zero is just a code basically to say one sex versus the other. It's got to be categorical in that case. Does that help out with the difference between those two?
the quantitative are always, you can find it like an average. You would mention that.
Yes, an average would make sense. Yeah, an average makes sense with them. You can put a unit on it. And those are some of the bigger things that indicate it's got to be quantitative in that case. It's very tricky though. That's why we're practicing these. They can be really subtle to tell the difference between. And let's see here. I think I kind of gave away this problem right here. It says determine which variables are categorical, numeric, discrete, or numeric continuous. Oh, I think I have a typo on these notes. Wasn't meaning to go into that right there. Let me do a strike through. We're just worried about categorical or quantitative. Geez, I also put numeric there. I want to get in the habit of using the main word our book most often is going to use. So let me fix up this second typo. Numeric is okay, but I want to say quantitative. And quantitative here as well. Sorry for those weird corrections. I should have noticed that one when I made the notes. So think for numeric, that's synonymous with quantitative, but I want to get in the habit of using one word for describing that, not two of them. If you call it numeric, that is completely fine as well. But let me color code that so it just makes a little bit more sense. Blue here and green for categorical. So this is the same problem we were looking at example 3. I think I kind of gave away the problem a little bit. It just says determine which variables are categorical or numeric. The discrete versus continuous, we're not going to go too much into at all in this class, so I decided to take it off this problem. I just forgot to do it when I posted these notes. I'll try to get these kind of weird corrections finalized a little bit better as we go throughout the weeks. Sorry for those last minute fixes. But here's how I would probably answer this problem. I'd probably just say numeric is going to be pH, chlorophyll. I have to look carefully how to spell that one. Average mercury in fish parts per million. Definitely it's a good idea to paraphrase these things. You don't have to write out in full. I would just call this average mercury. This was an interesting one because they're saying average mercury in all the fish in Alligator Lake. And they only sampled 5 fish to make that determination. So here, when you take the average, you're taking averages of averages. That's kind of convoluted in a certain sense. Does that make sense though? Gotcha. So average mercury in fish just means each lake, we think it has this average mercury for each fish you catch, but that was based off a sample of just 7 when they found that number right here. So number of fish sampled is another numeric or quantitative. Geez, that's kind of hard. Full disclosure, the last time I taught this class, it was at a different book, and they went with numeric, so now it's all flipped in my mind. I'll try to get that nailed down a little bit better. Quantitative. It's not that numeric is wrong, it's just you'll more likely read quantitative throughout the book when you're doing the reading. So next is number of fish sampled. I'll paraphrase it to number of fish. And so that means the only categorical variable on this one is the last variable, age of data. They took every single lake, there's 53 in this data set. The ... just means the table terminated there since we're only looking at a small snapshot of the data. And here, all those lakes were just classified as having recent data or data that was a year old. So age of data would be categorical in this problem.
Would the lake name be an identifier or categorical?
It would be an identifier on this one, yeah. So just an identifier for this. Well, we did it, folks. That's determining between quantitative and categorical variables, but it does absolutely get tricky. This one wasn't so bad because everything's kind of listed out. You can kind of tell just by this, it's got to be categorical. Some of the trickier questions go a little bit different. We're going to see an example 5, but any questions at all first, folks, with getting through this one? Okay, example 5 is same kind of idea. We're just looking at variables and trying to decide what type they are, quantitative versus categorical. But this kind of problem feels different because we're not looking at the data. We're looking at descriptions of what the data would be instead. So it says, classify each of the following variables as either being categorical or quantitative. And in part A, it says the variable is going to be weight in ounces. What would that feel like to everyone? Is that going to be quantitative or categorical? Good call. I would say if you're not sure, this kind of gave us a really good way to say it's got to be quantitative in that case. We're dealing with something that's numeric. It has a unit of ounces, so quantitative in this case. This one's a little bit trickier because it's maybe not as nice and clean of a unit as saying ounces, but these are going to be numbers, and the unit would be, well, the number of items purchased. So if we had a whole set of data, one of them says 12, unit would be 12 items purchased. That's kind of a complicated unit, but that makes this one quantitative as well. Better way to think about this one is we had a whole bunch of data of number of items purchased. It makes sense to ask, what was the average number of items purchased? So if an average makes sense in this case, we're looking at quantitative data again. Make sense, folks, on so far with part B? Okay, some of the questions in our math stat lab are about like this. Some of them go a little bit fast, and some of them are a lot longer than I realized. So like I said, after we finish this one here, we're going to look at one of the ones that turned out to be extra long, the very last problem on that set. But first, how about part C? What kind of variable does that look like for folks? Yeah, definitely. We're going to get things like brand of cola, that would be Pepsi, Coca-Cola, RC Cola, and so on. But those are just categorizations. Definitely nothing quantitative about it. So categorical. Part D has a giveaway. Any volunteers for saying what the giveaway would be on this one? Exactly. If they're telling you a unit, then it's definitely a red flag. That's a quantitative variable. Then last on the set, type of gas, regular, premium, or diesel, purchased by a gas station customer. Definitely. In fact, if they give you the categories like this, that's kind of the dead giveaway for the categorical variable. So that list of categories tells us we're looking at categorical data.
Is that in the what as well? If we did the 5 Ws for that problem, and you've got more information, those would be the what?
Yeah, absolutely. The what is telling us what the variables are. So what is variables? The who is the same as the sample. And I'm glad you asked about that because the problem we're about to take a look at does involve these two. And we'll give a look at that next. First, any last questions or comments, folks, on that example 5? Okay, let me save this up. And now we're going to do one of the trickiest things ever, I think, for this class on week 1, the MyStatLab problem. It's a good experience to see how this goes because it can be frustrating trying to get it right the first time through. That takes a lot of extra precision, attention to detail to get it. And it's really easy to miss these kind of questions. It's graded by a computer. They're multiple choice, and there are extremely subtle differences between a correct answer and an incorrect answer. So let's give this all a try. I might need help from everyone in the class, so I'll need your eyes to see if we can get this on the first try. If we don't, that's okay. That's part of the experience. We'll just try again. So let's go back to this thing, course resources. This is the one-stop shop to get going in the homework for everyone in the class, it turns out. Should have closed that one out. Takes a while to actually load into this thing. A whole bunch of different redirects going on. Let's go to chapter 1. And this one, you can tell I didn't have the funnest time with this one. Let's give it another go. Question number 8. Get a good window for this one. And here's how these kind of problems go. This is a tougher one. And when I make new homework assignments, I'm going to carefully vet these problems a little bit better. This was my first run at the system, so I think that's why it's a good idea for us to try it as a class as well. This is out of fairness at this point, I'd say. It says to start, identify the W's, name the variables, specify for each variable whether its use indicates that it should be treated as categorical or quantitative, and for any quantitative variable, identify the units for which it was measured. So a lot of stuff. It's kind of a guided tour though. They tell us first, identify the W's. You have to read the problem now. They say, in May of year 2020, a magazine reviewed electric bicycles. For each bicycle reviewed, they reported the motor size in watts, maximum speed in miles per hour, wheelbase in millimeters, brand name, whether the battery can be removed for security. They also provide pictures of each bike. And that's all they tell us. So a big study happened. Now we need to know, what is the who? Any volunteers for what that would be? I would say probably not the magazine. Probably the bicycles is my guess. And notice already how tough this is. When you click on these things, now it reveals you choices. Not specified could be a right answer sometimes to a few of these. But let's see if our guess is on there. Hey, the electric bicycles. Let's click on that and just hope for the best. Again, that feels right to me, but I did go through this problem before class, and I'm pretty surprised at how easy it is to make a mistake on this. Let's go next. So the who is like the sample. We had a sample of electric bikes. The what is the variable. So what are the variables? It's all the information we recorded. They say they reported, and then they list a bunch of stuff. Sounds like they're talking about variables right at that point. So I would say the variables are motor size, maximum speed, wheelbase, brand name, whether the battery can be removed or not. Would folks agree with that for the what, the variables? Awesome. Let's see if it's on the list. That's a pretty long list there. So click on it, and now this is really tricky in a way. I would guess that's the right answer because it has the right amount of stuff, but double check because they could take something out of there just to make this incorrect. So if you have two lists that look about the same, now we have to go back and make real sure. Let's just do it on this one. So motor size, speed, wheelbase, brand name. They paraphrased to removable battery, but that is what they were saying here on the last bit. So to me, that feels right. When is not so bad. If they said May 2020, that's the best information we have. So we'll just put it down. Let's see here, May 2020. Oh, thank you. I guess they would go in order of the months. Should have been using my thinking brain on that portion. Thank you for that. Where? I don't think it's specified either, right? So I agree with folks on this one. Let's see what the options are. Not specified. The factory location. Well, how would we know, right? But it seems plausible, but it doesn't mean it's the right answer. If it was the factory location, we should have that information somewhere inside here. Yeah, I agree with you. The battery location, that seems like the only one we can rule out. The magazine being aware doesn't even make sense, right? So I would hope that's correct. But to me, it almost feels like a pot shot on that one. I feel like it's the best choice only because none of these values here match up with the description of data. So I think that's the best accurate choice this time. Does that feel okay to folks so far? Okay. At this stage, this is like doing a tax form where you have to get a whole bunch of details just exactly right. That's why there's unlimited attempts on these kind of problems, because it's not a fair experience to try to get it right the first time. How about the why? Right, and when I saw this problem, I did the first time, I immediately thought, oh, it's just to give the best value to customers, right? That's what the magazine's all about. But they did not say that, so I agree with you folks, probably not specified is the best one. First time I did this problem, I think I selected that one because it just feels right. But again, when you're doing this kind of problem, they would have had to said, in order to determine which brand is the best electric bicycle, they did this. If they don't say any of that, I believe you're right. Not specified is probably the best answer. The next is how. The magazine reviewed electric bicycles. I agree with that. So let's go here. A magazine review. So again, it's kind of tricky, but I agree with this because it is in the problem. They said that. I think I clicked it on that one the first time I ran through this. It just makes sense, right? That seems like a plausible answer there.
The difference between that one indicates that the person who made the bike sent the information to the magazine rather than the magazine collecting the information.
Yeah, so if the magazine is like a consumer reporting advocacy thing, they can't just go on the manufacturer, right? Because there's one thing the manufacturer says, and then there's the reality of how these bikes actually perform. So I agree with that. And it also said magazine review is in sight here, so it feels plausible. Let's check the answer. Again, it always feels like it's kind of a pot shot. Any questions or comments first, folks, to this stage? Okay, let's click check answer. And they said fantastic. Whew. I agree. This was not my first run at this. So I'm telling you what it looks like if I was trying to do it for the first time, the kind of things you want to think about, but wasn't my first try either.
That's the only thing that
Yeah, it's kind of rough. They give you at the end of the attempts, they tell you, but then now you have to start over the problem to get full credit at that point. Yeah. Here's where I kind of went wrong on this problem. The reason we're doing this one in class, the reason I feel like it's unfair is I thought the problem ended right here. So I'm a little bit better at assigning these problems. I realize they go a little bit further sometimes. There is, it's really long. So let's keep on going. Name the variables. Well, we kind of already did that, right? The variables is the what. So go to your what portion. Did we do wheelbase? Yes. Month? That doesn't make sense. Is brand name in there? Yeah, it is. Pretty much I'm just looking at this line right here, right after the what. Yeah. Bicycle pictures. I don't think that's on there.
It is, but not very.
Oh, where did they have pictures? Oh, they provide pictures of each bike. Yeah. But
That's in there for yeah.
that's like the identifier. Each bike has a picture that they're looking at and probably a model number and all that stuff. So let's go next. Maximum speed, that was on there. Magazine,
No,
well, there is a magazine, but that's not the what, right? It's not a variable. How about battery?
Yes.
Definitely on that one. Motor size on there? See, this is where I missed the problem because it sounds like that's part of the study. Why wouldn't they?
The motor size is locked.
Oh, wait,
It's on there.
it is on there. See, this is very tricky.
On some of them, it's not on there, so.
Gotcha. Some of these problems are slightly different. So when you do a similar exercise, they change up the information a little bit here. So
Really have to.
that's what's tough about this. Yeah. And that means if you're working in groups, that's also kind of off on a way. Your problems sometimes are very similar. Sometimes there's a subtle differences between. So watch out if you're working in groups. Treat each problem as potentially a whole different one. So it looks like motor size is on this one. And here's the moment of truth. Okay, we're okay so far, but wait, there is more. On every single one of these, they're going to ask us, well, what kind of variable is it? Kind of what we just did on our homework set over, well, not our homework, but our notes over here. This is what it would look like as a quiz problem or exam problem. This is us practicing and seeing how it goes as one of these kinds of problems. It is a little bit different. It takes some getting used to. In my opinion, it is harder in a way. But once you see it done this way, doing it on paper becomes much more easier. Yes, absolutely. We're going to build off this and say, what display would you use if it was quantitative or versus categorical? So in section 2.1, we just bring that back in. Well, let's see here. Identify the variable type, units for months. If appropriate, choose a correct answer below. But month, that wasn't even a variable, right? So they shouldn't have even asked that. That's kind of just being a trick question. So for the ones that were not checked, you have to click not a variable when they come up. And I think they just come up randomly. Let's check that one. Okay. Next one is units for magazine. Was that a variable? No, so we do again, this option. Magazine is not a variable. It's kind of rough to have to say it's not a variable twice, essentially. Next one is motor size. That one is a variable. What kind of variable would you all say that one ought to be? Oh yeah, it's got a unit, so it's got to be quantitative. So we're sounding like nice, ordinary numeric data. Oh yeah, nice. So they even help us out with this right here. This is great for studying.
Basically the same thing.
Oh, let me take a look. Motor size is a quantitative variable. Its units are not provided. So I mean, if you answered something like this on a real exam, imagine that you said something that wasn't totally correct, I would still give you credit. I might just put an X on there if you wrote that out. That's why this system is a little bit harder. It's a non-human grading it now. And so it's completely cut or dry, black and white. Really rough. Thanks for mentioning that. It's this and this, which is causing really the extra difficulty. We have to tell apart those small, subtle things. I guess my best advice is go slow. The slower you go through this, actually, the more time you'll save instead of having to rehash the problem if we made a lot of mistakes. Let's check the answer on that one. Fantastic. Next one is maximum speed. I believe it was a variable, but I'm getting a little foggy on this. Let's scroll up to double check. Yes.
Miles per hour. You can see the question, right?
Oh, that's right. Thanks for spotting that. I forget it's still up there. So maximum speed is quantitative.
Units
Do
per
we have
hour.
units though? Oh, yeah, mph for miles per hour. That's a little bit rough right there. You just have to know that mph is miles per hour. I mean, most of us do, but imagine you're an English language learner. You might not be as familiar with that. But it's really kind of tough in a certain way. MSRP?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's manufactured suggested retail price or something. Yeah. Yeah, those are things that not everyone's necessarily going to know. So there's extra trickiness in here that's beyond the statistics even. Let's check the answer on this one. Okay. Next one is wheelbase. Did we have wheelbase? I thought we did. Let me see. Yeah. Wheelbase in millimeters. Hey, we do have that one there. So you'd have to know though that mm means this unit, millimeters. Like, I'm not great with units, to be completely honest. I usually took just math classes. I avoided chemistry, physics to the best of my ability. So I'm terrible at units. I might not have recognized going to millimeters, especially if I was tired. So that one looks pretty good. Everyone okay with part C for that one? Okay, let's check the answer and phew, we're 100 away almost. How about brand name? I would agree. Brand name is not going to give you anything that's quantitative. There's no unit that goes along with it. You're just going to say, I don't know what the brands are for these electric bikes, but Puffy, Kawasaki, whatever these are. So let's say brand name is categorical. I would always double check though. If I find one that looks like the right answer, make sure nothing else is more correct. Yeah.
If there was an option on that wasn't to go them to click branding as an identifier, how would you separate the two in this problem? Technically, an identifier would be a variable, right? In this scenario.
Well, it depends. Like, for example, if they had, say, 10 bikes, and every single bike had a unique brand, it looks like an identifier in that case. But if they have 10 bikes, 4 from one brand, maybe 6 from a different brand, now it's a categorical variable in that case. Does that make sense in between those ideas?
Two categories for each one to identify individual.
That's a great way to say it. You know, let's put that on our notes. Right here, we know we have an identifier. And this is because each of the 53 lakes has a unique value. I'll just say value because it could be a name, it could be a code, it can be anything along those lines, student ID numbers and so on. But that's kind of the gist of it. If, for example, Alligator Lake appears more than once in this data set, that becomes a categorical variable, but it's there uniquely just once as an identifier, just to tell the lakes apart. Oh, and here's the homework question. Let's hope for the best on that. I think we're nearly done. I just forgot how long this gets. Removable battery.
And then having to redo it is part.
Yeah, that's the worst part. I think this is my third time through it that we're doing today here in the class. How about removable battery? Any volunteers for what this should be? Absolutely. And let's double check. Everything else said either quantitative or not a variable.
But what is that units or yes or no? Does he? No, it doesn't say yes or no on the question.
You're right. I mean, we could imagine that would be true in the study, but what makes this one?
Whether or not it could be, yeah, but you can't find an average of the yes or no, so just that.
Yeah, right here where they said quantitative, that's what made that part incorrect in that case. So it looks like it should just be categorical right there.
Either it can be removed or it can't be. Just one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that was where it messed me up. That's I know. Figure out. Me too. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting there, folks. Bicycle pictures. Was that a categorical variable or a quantitative variable or? Right, I would say that's more likely the identifier. Each different bike has a unique picture. It feels like an identifier on this one. Did they ask about that? Gotcha. So we'll just say not a variable. That look all right to folks? Okay, let's check this out. We did it, folks. It is finally done. And that's almost an apology I have to give. I'm going to try to avoid those long questions. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry for switching out of that one so quick. I think we'd have both going on right here. There we go. Well, I'm going to try to, when I go and write these homework sets or put them together, I find a spot in my stat lab where I could just practice them as a student. For me doing that, that's just me investigating how long does a question actually get. So I'm going to keep these completely to a minimum. And this is a kind of a longer homework set only because this is the entirety of chapter 1. My homework sets are usually going to be a little bit shorter since, for example, Next thing we're doing is not all of chapter 2, we're doing just section 2.1. So that'll be a more contained homework set, no crazy long questions. Any last questions or comments, folks, about getting through these things? Okay. Well, we did it, folks. That's chapter 1. The main things to take away from chapter 1 is, I would say, this right here. Knowing the difference between the two variables, you are on a good path of getting through this kind of problem.
Will you ever refer to it as qualitative rather than categorical?
Oh, I just did it just now. I should say categorical. That's how I prefer to refer to it as. Yeah. Other questions at the moment? Okay, well, let's save these notes up. Oh, yeah, gotcha. No worries. Now, what happens next after these notes are saved? I'm going to post. Oh, hang on. Let me get out of the right section here. When I get some time, I'm going to overwrite these right here. It'll just have only the solutions that we did completed. Because we finished the chapter, the due date is now official. And then we just go to the next thing. We're now in section 2.1. Another thing you're going to notice that happens on the Moodle website, I have to show you to explain, is, for example, I put an extra section on here just in case we went really fast for some apparent reason. Also, it gives you a chance to know what's coming next, give a chance to download them or print them if you're preferring. But I don't think we're even going to get to section 2.2. So I'm going to move it to this week in that kind of way. So the sections move around as we move around through the week, and they stay wherever we complete them. So we complete it in this week. That's where this one stays. We'll leave this one here for the moment, but when we come back next week, it'll be down here as well, since we'll be finishing section 2.1 when we come back next week. Well, any questions at all, folks, before we jump to 2.1? Okay, so chapter 1 is done. With the ideas of categorical variables versus quantitative variables, we're now moving into chapter 2 on how to display those types of variables. So we're here now thinking about graphs as descriptions of those two different types of data. I put it in revised here because I made the same mistake that I made on the last notes. I had numeric right here. I prefer to say quantitative and categorical. I'm going to double check my notes before I publish them so there's not so many revisions. It just says fill out the table, but this one is more for a type of just notes for us. It wasn't like an honest, real example. A real example you might see in the homework starts really at example 2 right here. But now we have two different kinds of data. For categorical, suppose we had, say, lots of different blood types. We want to know how to display them. What graphics could we provide? So that's our appropriate graphical display. And we would say for this, a bar chart would be our natural choice if we're dealing with a categorical variable. You could say bar chart, bar graph, bar plot. These are all synonymous for the same exact thing. Other things could be a pie chart. And there are many, many other different displays we're going to be using. But this is going to be the major one that we're focusing on for categorical data, mainly just bar charts. If the data is quantitative, we won't see the quantitative displays in section 2.1. That's going to be section 2.2. But just for a preview of what we're getting into, for the quantitative data, we'll be using a histogram. Other displays, aside from the histogram, could be a dot plot. I'll go dot, dot, dot to convey many different kinds of displays for quantitative data. One of them is a stem and leaf plot, but I did direct in a reading here in section 2.2, the subsection stem and leaf displays. In the reading, you're welcome to skip that one. We won't be directly covering that in our actual class. So those are the major kinds of displays we're going to be using. And the description of whether we're using a bar chart versus a histogram really just depends on the type of data we're looking at. Any questions about that so far, folks? Okay, well, before we get through example 2, we all kind of have an idea of what a bar chart looks like, but let's just display one so we can get a feel for it. So in example 3, here's well, I guess example 2, that's our misnumber. I think that's example 4. That's a typo I need to fix. This is what we mean by a bar chart. Something like this, where we're looking at categories. These are the categories of the categorical variable. Say if it was blood types, you'd have A, B, and so on. It just tells us how many people fit into whichever category we're looking at. This is kind of a weird display. The height here would be somewhere, I guess, at about maybe 12 or 120,000 or so on. So that's what we mean by a bar chart. But what about a histogram? Folks heard the word histogram before? I feel like it is kind of a weird word for a display of data. Exactly. Histograms are a way to deal with now quantitative data. It looks like a bar chart, like exactly like you said, there's typically not gaps. Let's look at a quick histogram just to get a feel for what that is. I mean, we want to know what we mean by these if we're going to select the right display. So for a quick look at a histogram, here's a preview in section 2.2. And that's what we mean by histogram right here. So looks like a bar chart, right? But the only difference now is the horizontal axis contains a quantitative variable, and now there's a definite ordering of this axis here. So all this is now saying is, if you take one of these, maybe this one right here, in this bar of the histogram, from a value of about maybe 7.1 to maybe 7.25, there are 5 individuals that have that pH quantity. So it's telling you what the data aggregates altogether. Does that make sense to folks visualizing that histogram? Essentially, yeah. This variable here for frequency is synonymous to this one right here, telling us how many individuals fit into a category. But here it was definite categories, whereas over here, this is just a number line essentially, where all the typical values fell in. So very similar ideas, except if it's a quantitative data we're dealing with, it cannot be a bar chart, it must be a histogram. And if the data is categorical, say this type of data, it has to be a bar chart, it cannot be a histogram any longer. Only because we can't put numbers here ordinarily. So those are the 2 major kind of displays we're going to be looking at. In section 2.1, it's all about the bar chart, dealing with categorical variables. Section 2.2 will go back to the histogram when we're dealing with quantitative variables. So I'd say the main takeaway right now in section 2.1 is know the difference between categorical, you would choose a bar chart more often, and quantitative, you would use a histogram more often. Well, let's give this a try now in example 2. Of the following data sets, all it's asking is, which would you display with the bar chart, and which would you display with the histogram? And sometimes you might see this on an exam question. Briefly explain your choices. It means there's an explanation, but it may not even be a complete sentence. It could be a 1-word explanation. So let's look at part A. Here you have data, and we have a record of gender of selected individuals, 0 for male, 1 for female. What kind of display would you use to show this data? I agree. What makes this one a bar chart is these data showed 0s and 1s, but they're categorizing people. So we have a categorical variable. So let's say bar chart. Since the data is categorical. So I said briefly briefly explain your choices. And to me, this is a pretty good way to be brief. But all you said was that bar chart, data is categorical. I would still consider that full credit. You have the answer, and this is the explanation. It just feels a little bit, I mean, that's not a sentence at all. So for the sake of the notes, I think more often you'd want to put in that extra detail. But on a quiz, and especially on an exam, you are allowed to be a little bit more brief. So that's one down. Part B now asks, a record of the age of the selected parents in years at the birth of their first child. It's pretty interesting data. What kind of display would you use for these? Exactly. This one's a histogram. Absolutely, good call. This right here tells us we're looking at a quantitative variable, definitely. And right here, that's a categorization. That's the only reason we thought of that as being categorical on that one. So let's say histogram. Since this is quantitative data. So that's two down. Does that make sense to folks on how we're selecting one versus the other? Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely. You know, in a certain sense, I'd say that's even a better answer because you're not just telling me it's quantitative, you're giving me the why it's quantitative. So let's put that down as the answer officially on this one. Histogram, since the unit years is given. Yeah, I'd say that's a great answer on that one. And see, this is the benefit of not using MyStatLab for major things on the homework, like quizzes, or major things on your grade, like quizzes and exams, because there is a lot of flexibility in how you can answer a question. As long as you're hitting the main ideas that's tying together the fact that it was histogram because quantitative data, then you always get full credit. There could be lots of different ways to correctly answer these questions. But MyStatLab is punishing. Sorry about that. I'll be sure to assign better questions that aren't so long and redundant. But next part C says, a record of the height of selected individuals in inches. Would you all agree that ought to be a histogram again? Awesome. So to me, this is the giveaway. In inches means we have a unit. So we ought to use that histogram. I would say, give me one moment. You're referring to part B. Do you have to say years or is using age appropriate? I'd say age is just, I see your question. Yeah, age would have just been fine as well. We could have said histogram since age is given. So yeah, that would have been just fine as well, Courtney. Other questions so far? Okay, so let's say for this one, oh, that's not a pen. Let me try again. Histogram. Let's see if we can answer this one very, very tersely, as if it was an exam question. I would probably say histogram, quantitative data. And that gives a full answer there.
Would that be ordinal as well? Do we put that in ordinal value, or is it only quantitative or?
For this one, I would be expecting quantitative versus categorical, but ordinal is a pretty interesting word. Ordinal is a type of categorical variable, it turns out. So there's a couple types of categorical variables. Let's put down first for this one. Would you all agree that data like that ought to be categorical? Awesome. So let's call this, it's definitely categorical, but it would be considered, this is a bit confusing in the terminology, nominal, because there's no ordering at all in this. There's no reason why A came first. You could have put O first on this list. So there's no natural ordering. But when it comes to ordinal categorical variables, I do have a quick example on this one. That's, let's see, this right here. This is also a categorical variable that's been displayed. The categories are days of the week, but days of the week are special. There's an order to that. So this would be ordinal as far as categorical variable goes. So this categorical variable, let's put down here. This is categorical. That little thing up here. And ordinal, since days of the week have an order, a natural ordering. Sunday has to always come before Monday, no matter what on the days of the week. It'd be unnatural if we change the order on this. it looks like we're trying to paint a picture that isn't necessarily natural to the data. So this as a categorical variable is ordinal. Anything like months, days of the week have that feature. But this blood types as a categorical variable, we would call that not ordinal, just nominal, because it's just names of stuff. There's no actual precedence of one over the other. So those are really kind of tricky in a certain sense. It's the same kind of thing with quantitative data. Quantitative data comes in varieties as well. For example, you could talk about the number of classes you take, but that's going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? There's never a 2.5 normally. But if you're talking about the height of something as it grows, like say a tree, it takes on every single number between 0 and whatever its maximum height takes. So variables can be continuous if any number is possible, or they could be discrete if they have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But for our class, we're mainly just focusing on categorical versus quantitative. So those further subcategories of the different types of variables, they're important, but that's for if you're taking more and more statistics, they suddenly become important in research statistics, those kinds of things. So for us, these are the main things we're looking for, those differences between. Other questions so far? Okay, well, we've got one last one to go. What would y'all say is the right description for the display on part D? You have a data set with a whole bunch of blood types. Good call. This one's got to be a bar chart for sure. And the good news, whether it's categorical, nominal, categorical, ordinal, same display right here we would pick. We'll say bar chart. Since we have, and you could say whatever makes the most sense. You could say we have a categorical variable, we have categorical data. Let's go with we have categories. Where are the categories? Those were these, the actual blood types themselves. This is what gives away that the variable is categorical, which tells us from the table above that we filled out, we ought to use a bar chart for that data. So that's what this section is all about. We're going to focus mostly on analyzing, saying descriptions of what we see in a bar chart. Then section 2.2, we'll move over to quantitative data, dealing with the histograms next. Well, any questions at all, folks, on example 2? Okay, let's see what we have. We have about some 6 minutes and some change. And the next question, we're breaking into a full problem dealing with the bar chart. So I'd say this is probably a good stopping point for us. I wouldn't want to dive into a problem and break it in half unless we just got forced into it. Plus it's week 1, we are still figuring things out. Any last questions at all, folks, then, before we call it a night? Okay, well, thank you all for your patience with the book bundle weird issues that we're coming up with, the weird issues in my stat lab. But as you're working on your homework, if other issues come up, please don't hesitate to get in contact me. I'll be very happy to help out. Even if you have questions on the weekend, even if your question is, say, at 10 p.m. on the weekend, just write out that email. I'll check emails usually in the morning, but the moment you have that question and it's fresh in your mind, that's the best time to write that question. So don't hesitate to email me any time of the day. Have a great weekend, folks. I'll see you all next week.
It's not going to work for this class.
I believe that one doesn't have everything we need, unfortunately. It does not, unfortunately. It does just about everything, standard deviations, but it doesn't have the normal distributions, the t distributions and that kind of stuff.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, you bet.